All right, ladies and gentlemen, so welcome back. We are going to pick up our discussion on animal behavior by really working through some of these innate behaviors first. So let's start talking really just with this fixed action pattern. Really, one of the most simplistic behavioral patterns that we observe in organisms. So, a fixed action pattern is just a sequence of unlearned innate behaviors, and really they are completely unchangeable. So this is not something that these organisms are going to be born with, know how to do, and then sort of adjust as they gain experience. That's not what's happening here. They are born with it, they know how to do it, and it never changes. The other interesting thing about fixed action patterns is once that stimulus is present and it's initiated, there's no going back. There's no stopping the behavior midway. It's going to get carried out to completion. So they are triggered only by external cues, what we call stimuli. And great example of this is with these three-spined sticklebacks. They're fish. So fish, sticklebacks in particular, are territorial organisms. Males will attack other males to prevent them from invading their nesting territories. It's a way to kind of ensure that, all right, if I'm going to mate with this female, I know that those eggs are containing my genetic information, and so I'm helping to ensure that my genes are the ones that are getting passed on, not some other male who's kind of coming in sneakily and mating with my female, and now the paternity of these offspring are in question. So these particular fish will actually attack other males when they've got this red underside. So when they see this red, that indicates another male based on that coloring. This is what we typically see. And so they're assuming that that red is from an intruder, a neighboring male, and so we're going to attack. If there's no red stomach, that means it's either a fish of another species that I'm not worried about, or it's a female. And so I'm not going to waste the time and energy to attack this fish because it's not a threat. So the stimulus is this red underside. We're going to attack as a result. And it really doesn't seem to matter, even if they're unrealistic models. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that it looks like a fish. It is just this red underside. So let's take a look at the experiment that they performed to kind of watch how this works. So if you took a look, here are the three models. So that clearly looks like a fish, kind of fish shape, but now that's the red underside. And this really doesn't look like a fish at all, but still has that red underside. So they put these models into these tanks. You can see the male back here, and he's looking at this other fish. So this first one they put in looks very much like himself, but no red underside, so presumably a female who's not a threat to his territory. And so no behavioral attacking occurs because it's not necessary. This is not a threat, and so I'm not going to expend the energy to attack something that's not going to be a problem for me. Same fish, he's back there in that back corner again. This time, similar thing. Doesn't even really look like a fish, but it's got that red underside, and there he is attacking that model, trying to get rid of it because it presumably poses a threat. Another model really doesn't look like a fish at all, but red underside, and once again, we've got that male fish attacking this model, assuming that this organism is in fact a threat. We need to get rid of it. And as soon as that fish sees that red underside, that behavior starts, and it's going to go until attack is complete and that opposing male, or model in this case, is in fact out of the way. Some other behaviors that are sort of more physical, we can talk about kinesis and taxis. So kinesis is a simple change in the rate of activity based on some response to a stimulus. It's really one of the major types of animal movement we see that occurs because of some sort of external stimulus. And it usually is there from an evolutionary standpoint, presumably to move and help these organisms get to more favorable environments. If you know any of your Latin roots, that term kinesis literally indicates any sort of movement. Think of things like cytokinesis, right? The division of those cells because we're moving those cytoplasm apart. It's probably one of the places you've come across that before. Two types I'll just kind of throw out there are this idea of orthokinesis. So this is the speed of the movement that changes as a result of some sort of stimulus. The more intense the stimulus, the quicker the movement. Or chelokinesis, the frequency or the rate of turning is proportional to the stimulus. So giving you just an example of what we're talking about here with this kinesis are these little sow bugs, and you may have come across them in dirt in the past. So these sow bugs will actually move in response to variation in humidity. The more dry an area they find themselves in, the more activity because they don't like it. They much prefer a more moist environment, so they will speed up their movement to get to a place that is more favorable, so more humid, but there really is no directionality to their movement. It's random. They will continue to move faster and faster so long as the area continues to maintain that dry environment. Once they get to a more moist environment, their directionality doesn't really change, but their activity does. It slows down once they've gotten to an environment that is more favorable. So kinesis is the rate of activity, but there isn't really a sort of beeline to a certain environment. They're just adjusting their speed or the frequency of their motion to hopefully get themselves to where they need to be. Taxis, on the other hand, is actual directional movement. So we're moving toward or away in a particular direction. So we can talk positive versus negative taxis, positive being the movement directly towards the stimulant because it's presumably something favorable, something they want. Negative taxis moving away from that stimulant because it's something dangerous. So two examples here would be something like phototaxis, movement in response to light. So what happens when you turn your porch light on at night in the middle of the summer? Well, if you leave it on long enough, before you know it, you've got all of these bugs, moths, that sort of thing, buzzing around it because they are attracted to it. So that is a positive taxis. They'll move towards that stimulus because it is an attractant to them. Chemotaxis is in response to chemical signals. So this could be something like an ant trap. We put it out, it's sort of this sugary substance, and the idea for us is that those ants will move towards that trap because it is attractive to them. So it's a positive taxis in that situation. Negative taxis, let's go with the chemical as well. We put out some sort of spray to deter deer from eating our plants. Well, they're moving away from it because it doesn't smell good to them. So that would be more of a negative taxis. While we're on the topic of movement, let's talk about migration because this definitely seems to be something that a host of animals do. So why do they do it? Well, if we look at migration, these are by definition regular but long distance changes in location over time. So they use environmental cues to trigger that movement, and that movement is in a very particular direction. Question really for animal behaviorists is how and why? Why do they do this? Um, and there's a lot of questions about how do they do it? How do they know where to go? Because they really seem to get to the same location year after year after year. And it's quite an interesting thing. So there seems to be some sort of genetic component to it. There's some question about are they capable of identifying shifts in the sun? If you've ever paid attention to the way light rays maybe come through the windows of your house, um, the orientation of the sun changes over the course of the year. So when we get to um, the summer solstice, it's as high in the sky as it will get, and it will slowly dip down until we get to December and we get to the shortest day of the year. And that's because of the movement of the sun, because the earth isn't its axis isn't straight up and down, we're on that tilt. Um, Circadian rhythms may also play a role in this, so some sort of internal 24-hour clock that might be integral to their nervous system. They might be able to use things like the position of things like the North Star as a way to navigate, much like we do. It's just a question of how do they do it? How do they know? Um, there are some questions about some birds and perhaps their ability to sense the Earth's magnetic field as a way to understand direction and where they're going as well. It's pretty cool. If you haven't really paid attention to that black cap bird example in your textbook, it's a pretty cool one. So take a look at that. They sort of talk about how they put these birds into this system and they can still watch where they're going. The birds still seem to know, even devoid of all sorts of external stimuli, that A, it's time to migrate and the direction that they should be migrating in. It's pretty neat stuff.
Well, there are a lot of different facts about monarchs that people should know. One is that this butterfly migrates to Mexico, where it overwinters, and then it returns from Mexico in the spring, and then it has several generations before there's another migration south again. And this migration is really the most fantastic insect migration in the entire world. It numbers hundreds of millions of butterflies each fall. The butterflies are moving in the fall migration at about 25 to 30 miles a day as they're going south. A large proportion of them make it to the overwintering sites as they pass through this country and through Mexico to this overwintering area, which is west of Mexico City. And there they go into the mountains at about 11,000 feet and form tremendous clusters of butterflies with up to 50 million butterflies per hectare. And it's truly a remarkable phenomenon. If the sun hits the butterflies and the wind hits the butterflies just at the right time of day, at the right time of year, these butterflies will take off in big cascades and come off the trees, sweeping down from the trees just to move around a bit. And it's just like no other experience you could possibly have. Another phenomenon that you see down there is something that we call streaming, where the butterflies will come off of these clusters and race down the mountains at 10 to 12 miles an hour to try to find water. And then you'll see a reverse path. But the path coming down the mountains is they're kind of doing sometimes flying, sometimes gliding, because they're going downhill and they're going pretty fast. On the way up the mountains, they have to fly the entire way. They have to use powered flight. So it's a different sort of thing to see. Once one streaming down, going pretty fast, the other one kind of huffing and puffing to get back up to where they were, to cluster again in the trees overnight.
While we're on the topic of being able to know circadian rhythms as a potential reason to migrate, let's talk about what a circadian rhythm is. So, we can talk about behavioral rhythms that seem to be innate to a lot of organisms. And there's your circadian rhythm versus your circannual rhythm. So, circadian rhythm is your daily cycle, knowing day versus night. Um, and organisms who are nocturnal versus diurnal, that's what we're talking about. So, nocturnal organisms are things that would typically be awake at night but sleep during the day. Um, Lots of teenagers sometimes end up in that nocturnal stage. My husband probably would prefer to be a nocturnal organism. He definitely functions much better at night. Diurnal, on the other hand, is like most of the human population, or at least me, where you prefer to be much more functional during the day. Interesting thing is that's actually something that you kind of are born with, and yet at the same time you have to learn as well. There's a lot of newborns that we talk about being on kind of a flipped schedule because they get lulled to sleep in mommy's belly while she's pregnant during the day because she's presumably up and moving. Um, and then she goes and sleeps at night. She's quiet, she's still, and baby starts doing flips because there's no movement to rock me to sleep. And unfortunately, sometimes that often ends up carrying on outside the womb. And so baby is born, baby doesn't know that dark means sleep because they've just spent the last 9 months in complete darkness. And so they have to learn that particular day-night schedule. Some babies are really good at picking that up quickly, and some babies not so much. Your circadian rhythm is much more like the migration patterns, so being able to link behavior to changing seasons. So the migration, a lot of organisms will reproduce only at certain points in the year, so also sort of a changing season rhythm for them as well. And there even are some organisms who have behaviors that are linked to lunar cycles, that are affected by tidal movements. So go back to the fiddler crab that we talked about at the beginning of this chapter, and their reproduction is tied to those lunar cycles. Um, Sea turtles, same thing, right? Needing to be able to lay their eggs at the right time so that when their eggs hatch, those babies have the appropriate tidal movements to be able to get hopefully back to the ocean without getting snatched up.